feel depressed and pessimistic and in despair. So to avoid those two attitudes, a middle way would be just to accept it, to acknowledge it, it's there, but at the same time, keep our mind positive and optimistic. And there are some Buddhist ideas that can help us to do that. For example, impermanence. Impermanence means things are subject to change. Things do change. Nothing is permanent, nothing is fixed, nothing will last forever. So that's true for suffering. So whatever suffering or problem there is, um, it's not going to last forever. It's temporary. It's there for a while, but eventually it will pass away. So getting more familiar with impermanence can help us have a kind of lighter, more positive attitude, even with regard to suffering and problems. And then also remembering the Buddha nature that every person, every being has the ability, has the potential to become completely free of suffering and problems and reach a state of illumination, of enlightenment. Another thing that's really helpful is thinking of others, because one problem is when we have a problem, when something is unpleasant in our life, there can be the tendency to get sort of obsessed with that, like really focus on that, focus on me and my problem, as if, almost as if I'm the only person in the world who has a problem. Have you ever noticed that? You get kind of really caught up in your problem and you just forget about the rest of the world and the rest of humanity and the problems they're experiencing. And then, so when that happens, I don't think we do it deliberately. I think it's just the way our mind works, the negative bias of the mind, I think. So when that happens, focused on my problem, it can seem to grow bigger and bigger, and eventually it seems really huge. It's enormous, like a mountain. And one idea in Buddhism that can be really helpful with this is to think about other people and the fact that they have problems too. I'm not the only person in the world who has problems. Other people have problems too. And many people probably have problems that are worse than yours. I mean, just look at what's going on in Syria right now or in Africa, where there's a shortage of food and water. So, just, looking at what's happening in the world around us, we can see that many people have worse problems than what I'm going through. So putting your attention on that, putting your attention on other people's problems can really help you to stop focusing on your problem, meaning that, you're not so obsessed with it. And then it can seem smaller, like shrinks instead of grows. It can seem smaller. And another benefit of this is that you realize you're not alone. Because when we get too obsessed with my problem, then we feel very alone, you know, cut off from other people. Everybody's happy, everybody's doing really well. I'm the only one who's suffering. So then on top of the problem, we also feel alone, alone and lonely in our problem. And that just makes us feel worse. So when you open up and think about other people and how they have suffering, they have problems too, then you don't feel so alone. It takes away that sense of isolation and distance from others. So these are things that can actually relieve suffering, relieve problems. And so even if you are going through some kind of problem or some painful experience, these methods can help. I know this doctor in America. Um, I met him when he was still a medical student, and he came to Asia because he wanted to learn Asian methods of healing, acupuncture, and energy movements, and so on. And now he's working in a clinic for pain management. He works with people suffering from chronic pain, and he says he works mostly with refractory patients. I had never come across that word before, but it means patients for whom the usual methods and medications and so on don't work. Yeah. So pain medication doesn't always work for everybody. So he's in his work he teaches other kinds of methods such as mindfulness and acupuncture and I don't know different methods. So some of these are from the Buddhist tradition, and he says there's a lot of research into these alternative methods from the Buddhist tradition, and they do work. So, for example, mindfulness really helps in relieving pain, and also compassion, training in compassion, having more awareness of others and opening up to others and working on having more compassion for others. So research shows that these methods actually do work. They do help with pain. So that doesn't mean we can't take pain medication or try other methods to avoid the pain. But sometimes we try these other methods, but the pain may not go away, or it may not go away immediately. It might be there for a while. So then it's useful to know methods for working on our mind, our mental state, our mental attitude. It can help us to deal with pain. In fact, there's a whole body of teachings in the Tibetan tradition that's called transforming suffering into the path or transforming suffering into happiness. So there are different methods for working with suffering, whether it's physical suffering like pain or sickness, or mental, emotional suffering like depression or anxiety or fear, and working with these problems with our mind, working on changing our mental state, our mental attitude about our problems. And in this way, these problems can actually be part of our spiritual practice, part of our spiritual growth, progressing along the path and getting closer to enlightenment. So anyway, that's a lot of blah blah blah. We'll do we'll do some meditation on this, but let's take a break first for about 10 minutes. So there's tea, coffee, and snacks upstairs if you like. So we'll do a meditation now on this topic of suffering or unsatisfactoriness. So this will be somewhat different than the previous meditation where we were just focusing on the breath. So here I'll be asking you to contemplate different points. So I'll introduce a point and then give you some time to contemplate that particular point. So we still need, when we're doing this kind of meditation, it's called analytical meditation. We still need to try to have concentration or focus on the topic. And so if some other thought pops up into our mind, something we want to do later tonight, or a phone call we want to make, or something like that, that's not related to the meditation. So if that kind of thought comes up in the mind, we need to recognize that that is a distraction and try not to get carried away with it, and instead let it go, put it aside, and then come back to the meditation. So just try to be aware of what your mind is doing, whether your mind is meditating on this topic or not. And if it does wander away, try to put aside the other thought and come back to the meditation. So start by making yourself comfortable. And again, it's good to keep the back straight if you can, to have a more focused, concentrated mind. And also, if you are feeling sleepy and you think you might start to fall asleep during the meditation, then you don't need to close your eyes all the way, but leave them open a little bit, enough to allow some light to come in. So one way of contemplating suffering is in terms of three kinds of suffering, which are progressively more subtle. Because the Buddhist explanation of suffering is probably more deep and pervasive than most people's understanding of suffering. So the first of the three types of suffering is just called suffering of suffering. And this refers to really obvious forms of suffering. For example, physical pain, sickness, discomfort. So any kind of unpleasant experiences that we have with our body, being cold, being hot, hungry, thirsty, and so forth. These would be included in the suffering of suffering. But it also includes mental states that are unpleasant, that are unsatisfactory. So just spend some time looking at your own experience. You can think about experiences you may have had today or in the last couple of days, or you could also think to other times in your life when you may have had some really strong experiences of physical pain or difficulties, or mental, emotional problems. So just bring to mind some experiences you yourself have had of this first type of suffering, obvious and easily understandable forms of suffering. So we're looking at these just to recognize that this is something that exists in our life. It's a part of our life. It may not be there every single moment, but it is something that comes and goes in our life. But as I mentioned before, the point of meditating on suffering is not to become depressed or feel hopeless or in despair, but it's just to recognize that it's a reality. And it can be helpful to remember that it's impermanent. Suffering is something that comes and goes. It's not always there every single moment. But even the heaviest, worst kinds of suffering don't last forever. They're all impermanent. And it's also helpful to be aware that everybody has suffering, not only oneself. So obviously, people who are poor or living in places where there's a war going on or famine, starvation. So it's obvious that they have suffering. But what's not always so obvious is even the people living in very wealthy countries and even people who have a lot of wealth, like millionaires, celebrities, movie stars, royalty, and so forth. So even people way up at the top of society, they have problems too. They have suffering too. Just having a human body, having this kind of body means that we have suffering. We get sick, we have headaches, we have pain, we get old, and we have problems getting along with other people. So even the wealthiest person, the most fortunate person in the world, isn't free of suffering. So it's something that exists in everybody's life. And again, the real purpose of looking at suffering, being aware of suffering, is to get motivated to become free of suffering. If it wasn't possible to be free of suffering, then wouldn't be any point in meditating on it. Better to just avoid it, to escape from it. But there is a possibility to become free of suffering. And that requires some effort, some energy. We can put our energy into working on our mind, transforming our mind, developing our mind through meditation. That's the way to be free of suffering. That takes energy, effort. So being aware of suffering gives us that kind of energy or effort to find a way to be free from it. And then the second of the three kinds of suffering is somewhat more subtle, not so easy to recognize. It's called the suffering of change, and it actually refers to pleasant experiences which do not last. They are only transitory or temporary. So we have this pleasant experience for a while, and then it stops, disappears, it goes away, and we're still left with a situation that's not satisfactory. So a good example of this is eating. I think most people like to eat food, and we need to eat food. Our stomach gets empty, we need to fill it, we need energy, we need to eat in order to stay alive. And usually eating food is a pleasant experience. The taste of the food, the smell of the food, the hunger going away. So this is a pleasant experience. But how long does it last? So we have to stop eating at some point, otherwise we'll get sick. And then a few hours after we have eaten, our stomach is again hungry and we again need to eat. So the pleasant experience of eating is something that is transitory. It only lasts for a while. And then that pleasure goes away and we eventually again have the discomfort, the unpleasant experience of being hungry and having to eat again. So it said that this pleasant experience of eating isn't true pleasure because it doesn't last. It doesn't fully satisfy us. It doesn't fully remove our suffering, our problems. It's just a temporary break from our suffering. Another example of this is just paying attention to what we do with our body. We don't always notice it, but we're almost constantly moving our body to try to find a comfortable position. Whether we're standing, whether we're sitting, whether we're lying down, whatever position we put our body in the beginning it may feel comfortable, may feel pleasant. But after a short time, it starts to become uncomfortable, unpleasant, and then we want to move in order to find a more comfortable position. So whatever position we put our body in is only pleasant for a short period of time. And then that pleasure, that pleasant experience goes away and is replaced by an unpleasant one. Just see if you can be aware of this with your body, even now as you're sitting here. So it's very hard or even impossible to find any example of a pleasant experience that we have that continues, that lasts, and doesn't disappear. Probably, if we look carefully, all of our pleasant experiences are only short term, they only last a short period of time and then they disappear. But what I've discovered, there is a kind of pleasure or happiness or bliss that doesn't disappear, that lasts. That's the bliss of nirvana, the bliss of enlightenment. That's a state of incredible peace, happiness, bliss. It just goes on, doesn't disappear. So we can have that experience as well by working on our mind, by transforming our mind, by practicing meditation. And then the third of the three types of suffering is called pervasive suffering. And this refers to the very situation we are in when we are not enlightened beings, when we haven't reached nirvana or enlightenment. So when instead we are in samsara, cyclic existence, the unenlightened state. And this means that our mind is not completely free of disturbing emotions. Within our mind, there are experiences such as anger, hatred, irritation, jealousy, desire, unsatisfactoriness, confusion, fear, anxiety. We have all these disturbing states of mind, disturbing thoughts and emotions in our mind that come and go, but we're never completely free of them. We can never just stop them altogether and they never come back. So it's like they torment us again and again, over and over. So this situation where our mind is tormented by disturbing emotions and not free of disturbing emotions is the third type of suffering. And we can see this easily when we try to meditate. We try to focus on the breath or some other object and just keep it there and be calm and peaceful. But we can't do that for very long before our mind gets bombarded by all kinds of thoughts and memories, and some of them are quite disturbing, quite unpleasant, but we can't stop them. And again, this is a problem that everybody has, not only ourselves, oneself, but all other people, all other beings. As long as they haven't reached nirvana or enlightenment, they still have this problem of disturbing thoughts and emotions. So, in fact, one benefit of meditating on suffering, becoming aware of suffering, is to have more compassion for others, more awareness of the suffering and the problems that others are experiencing based on our own suffering. So that helps us open our heart to others, feel compassion for others. And then that can motivate us to want to help others to relieve their suffering. and as much as we can to not give them any suffering, to make sure that our actions, the things that we do not cause suffering to others. So see if you can come to a conclusion after having done this meditation that you would like to do whatever you can to eliminate suffering for yourself, to free yourself from suffering and its causes, but also to help other people, other beings, as much as you can. Of course, we can't help everybody, everyone all over the world, but those that we live with and work with and are friends with, those around us, to try to be aware of their suffering and help them have less suffering and not give them more suffering. So see if you can make that kind of determination as a result of doing this meditation. And then let's make a dedication of this meditation and the other things we've done here tonight. We have created some good energy, positive energy, and this energy is the cause of happiness and good experiences. It's good karma, and it's also helpful for our spiritual development along the path to liberation and enlightenment. So we can share this energy with others, just with our thoughts, wishing that the positive energy we've created here tonight will be beneficial to as many other people and beings as possible and help bring about happiness and peace, freedom from suffering and its causes, and help all of us get closer to enlightenment, which is fulfillment of our highest potential. Any questions or comments? Oh, sorry. Was that depressing? I think it's good to keep in mind what the Dalai Lama said, that, you know, take it easy with the topic of suffering and not think about it in such a way that it makes you depressed, because that's not the point. The point is to get energy to do what we can to relieve suffering, both our own suffering and the suffering of others. So we need to do it in a balanced way. Does that make sense? Yeah. So if there's no more questions, I'll just mention Next Thursday, Venerable Mary, another nun you may not have met from Scotland. She's actually here right now. She's going to be teaching a weekend course on the 6 perfections. And then she will also teach next week. Next Tuesday and Thursday night, she'll be teaching because I'm going away for about 10 days. So she'll teach next week. And she said she wanted to talk about the practice of purification. And lead some meditations. We actually did that last week, didn't we? Yeah. So you get more chance to learn about purification and how to meditate on that, how to do that. And then following that is the Easter weekend. And the week after Easter, I will still be away, so we won't have any classes that week. And then I'll be back on the 22nd. So the week of the 25th and the 27th, I will be back. And I think that week on Thursday night, I'm going to talk about anger, I think, how to work with anger. What are some remedies, some methods we can use to transform our mind, and instead of being angry, to be more peaceful and patient and that kind of thing. Yeah.
What is the difference between Tuesday and Thursday these days?
Well, Tuesday is more of a teaching night, and we do some meditation, but it's more teaching. And I was teaching Discovering Buddhism since January until this week, but I'm going to change to a different topic starting the last week of April. I'm going to use the book. There's a book called The Art of Happiness with the Dalai Lama and a Western American psychologist. So I'm going to give talks based on that and lead meditations. So it's about how to be more happy, how to deal with different kinds of problems like loneliness and insecurity and the kind of problems a lot of Westerners deal with, how to deal with those. So it's part teaching and part meditation, whereas Thursday is more meditations. And we're in the Thursday class, I'm going through the book that I wrote, How to Meditate. So each week we do a different meditation. And by the way, Bob, you were writing down notes from the meditation, but it's in my book. So if you have a copy of the book, then it's in there.
I haven't had a chance to look at the book yet. But I get these certain inspirations I mix with the notes. So it's
okay. So you're writing your own kind of
and then I'm gonna do the book
after. Okay. But anyway, this meditation is in there, and it explains the 3 types of suffering more in a more detailed way.
What's the next one you'll be teaching?
Working with anger. So in the book, there's a whole section. I think it's called Working with Disturbing Emotions or Working with Negative Emotions. So it has methods for working with anger, fear, and anyway, so we'll go through those. Not all in 1 week, but one emotion per week. So the first one we'll look at is anger.
You seen the T-shirt, the angry hand?
No.
Oh.
The angry hand. Oh, I see. Yeah, it looks pretty angry.
And the week after next week, Mary's teaching. I'll get a few sets.
No class. Yeah, I don't remember the date of that, but it's the week after Easter. So it's like we have a 1 week Easter break. Do most people go away over Easter?
Oh, we're going to Poland. That's where their families live.
But children have a week off from school?
Not an entire week. Right. Just half a week.
No, they have 10 days.
They have 10 days. Yeah.
Wow. It's a good time to go away then. Family holiday.
Easter eggs and eat lamb.
Oh, okay. Mm.
Pre-Hungarian. Oh yeah. Right. We eat
Easter
lamb
lunch with
for lunch. My family tradition. My påske.
What do we do in America? What do we eat?
In America, in the States,
Whenever you eat lamb, you have this green mint.
yeah. You don't do that in Denmark so much, do you?
The Rex shit instead, but that's not for lamb so much. The green mint's
I
really
think some
good.
Okay. Well, we'll stop there for tonight. You can talk about food and recipes.